The woman who told me I was too pathetic to become a lawyer just walked into my law office, begging me to save her from a messy divorce. And I am about to make her pay for every cruel word she ever said to me. You know that moment when your entire world shifts? When the person who once made you feel smaller than dust suddenly needs you more than their next breath. I was staring at that moment right now, sitting behind my mahogany desk in my corner office, watching Zara Blackwood fidget in the leather chair across from me. The same Zara who had looked me dead in the eye 10 years ago and said the words that still echo in my mind every single day. You are just average. Law school eats girls like you alive. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. How the girl she called too average became the lawyer she desperately needed. The wine was cheap. The apartment was cheaper. And the dreams we shared that night felt impossibly expensive. I was 25, working at Morrison's Books downtown, spending my lunch breaks hunched over LSAT prep books while eating stale sandwiches. My fingers were always stained with ink from pricing books. My clothes smelled like old paper and forgotten dreams. Zara was everything I was not. She had landed a coveted position at Sterling and Associates, the most prestigious PR firm in the city. Her engagement ring caught the light every time she gestured, a 3-carat reminder that Kieran Wells, heir to the Wells media empire, had chosen her. We had been friends since college. Or at least, I thought we were friends. That night, as we sat on my second-hand couch drinking wine that cost less than her manicure, I made the mistake of sharing my secret dream. I have been thinking about law school, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know it sounds crazy, but I have been studying for the LSAT and... Zara's laugh cut through the air like broken glass. Law school? Seriously? She set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Honey, you need to be realistic. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already knew what was coming. She leaned forward, her perfectly contoured face wearing an expression I had never seen before. Pity mixed with something darker. Look around you, she said, gesturing at my tiny apartment with its peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture. You work at a bookstore. You eat ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. You cannot even afford a decent interview suit. Each word hit like a physical blow. Law school is not just about passing some test, she continued, her voice growing sharper. It is about connections, about proving you belong in a world of power and influence. You are just average. And average does not survive in law school. It gets chewed up and spit out. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at her, this person I had trusted with my deepest insecurities, watching as she delivered the killing blow to my confidence with surgical precision. I am not trying to be mean, she said, softening her tone in a way that somehow made it worse. I am trying to be a good friend. Save yourself the debt and the heartbreak. Find something more realistic. I nodded numbly, pretending to agree, but inside something was breaking. And from that broken place, something else was being born. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage that would fuel me for the next decade. After Zara left that night, I sat alone in my tiny apartment, staring at the LSAT prep books scattered across my coffee table. Her words echoed in my head like a poison mantra. Too average. Girls like you do not survive. I could have let those words destroy me. I could have packed away the books, accepted my fate, and spent the rest of my life wondering what if. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I opened the books and studied harder than I had ever studied anything in my life. Every spare moment became sacred. I studied during my lunch breaks, sacrificing those stale sandwiches for extra practice problems. I studied on the bus to work, ignoring the looks from other passengers as I muttered logical reasoning patterns under my breath. I studied until 2 in the morning, fueled by instant coffee and the memory of Zara's condescending smile. When the LSAT results came back, I stared at the screen in disbelief. I had not just passed. I had crushed it. The acceptances started rolling in. Not Harvard or Yale. I was still realistic about my limitations. But solid schools. Respectable schools. Schools that would give me the ammunition I needed to prove Zara wrong. I chose Northeastern Law. Not the most prestigious, but they offered me a partial scholarship. More importantly, they had a reputation for turning out scrappy fighters. Perfect. Zara had been right about one thing. Law school was brutal. The competition was vicious. My classmates arrived with designer briefcases and trust funds, speaking in casual references to their fathers' law firms and their summers in the Hamptons. They looked at me, with my thrift store suits and my part-time job at the campus library, like I was an anthropological curiosity. I could have crumbled under their dismissive stares. Instead, I used them as fuel. While they partied at exclusive networking events I could not afford to attend, I was in the library until closing. While they relied on their connections to secure prestigious internships, I wrote hundreds of cold emails until someone gave me a chance. I was not the smartest person in my class. I was not the most naturally gifted, but I was the hungriest. I graduated in the middle of my class, still average by traditional standards, but I had something my classmates did not. An unshakable belief that I belonged wherever I decided to plant my flag. The first law firm that hired me was small, scrappy, and perpetually broke. Perfect training ground for someone who needed to learn how to fight with limited resources. I threw myself into every case like my life depended on it. Divorce proceedings became my specialty. Not because I had any particular passion for family law, but because divorce cases were where the real battles were fought. Money, power, secrets, revenge. All the elements that required a lawyer who was not afraid to get her hands dirty. I worked 18-hour days. I took on pro bono cases that more established lawyers would not touch. I built relationships with private investigators, forensic accountants, and therapists who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Slowly, word spread. The average girl from the bookstore was becoming known as someone you wanted on your side when your world was falling apart. After 5 years of grinding, I made the leap. I opened my own firm, Carrington Legal Solutions. The office was everything I had dreamed of during those wine-soaked nights in my tiny apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sleek furniture that cost more than my old monthly rent. A reception area that whispered power to everyone who walked through the door. But the real prize was the wall behind my desk. My law degree hung there, professionally framed. Next to it, in elegant script, I had mounted a quote that reminded me every day why I had fought so hard to get here. You are just average. Law school eats girls like you alive. Zara Blackwood. Every time a client walked into my office, they saw that quote. Most assumed it was some inspirational saying about overcoming adversity. They had no idea it was a 10-year-old insult that had become my daily motivation. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was reviewing depositions for a particularly nasty custody battle when my assistant knocked on my door. There is a potential client on line 2, Miranda said. She sounds upset. I glanced at my calendar. I do not have any consultations scheduled. She says it is urgent. Something about a high-asset divorce. She mentioned she knew you personally. Something cold settled in my stomach. In my line of work, personal connections usually meant complications. Did she give you her name? Miranda glanced at her notepad. Zara Blackwood. The world stopped. 10 years of preparation. 10 years of building armor. 10 years of imagining this exact moment. And suddenly, I was that 25-year-old girl again, sitting on a second-hand couch, watching my dreams get dissected by someone I had trusted. Put her through, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The phone rang once before I picked up. Carrington Legal Solutions. This is Attorney Carrington. Oh my God. Her voice was exactly the same, but stripped of its usual confidence. It really is you. Hello, Zara. I cannot believe this. When I saw your name online, I thought it had to be a different person. But here you are. You actually did it. The amazement in her voice might have been flattering once. Now it just reminded me of how little faith she had ever had in me. What can I do for you? I kept my tone professional, distant. I need help. The words came out in a rush. My marriage. Kieran. Everything is falling apart. I need a lawyer. A really good lawyer. The irony was delicious. I see. What type of legal issue are we discussing? Divorce. She said the word like it tasted bitter. But it is complicated. There are assets, businesses, a prenup I never really read. Kieran has lawyers, really expensive ones. I need someone who can fight them. Fight them. The girl who had told me I was too average to survive law school now needed me to fight the biggest battle of her life. I would be happy to schedule a consultation, I said. My rate for initial consultations is $500, and if we move forward, my hourly rate is $800. Silence. $800 an hour? I am very good at what I do, Zara. Excellence costs money. Another pause. Okay. Yes. Whatever it costs. I need someone who can go to war. War. She had no idea what she was asking for. I can see you tomorrow at 3. My assistant will send you the intake forms and a retainer agreement. Thank you, she whispered. I know this is probably weird, given our history. There is no history. I cut her off smoothly. There is only a potential attorney-client relationship. I will see you tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. Then I sat back in my chair and smiled. She arrived 10 minutes early, which told me everything I needed to know about her state of mind. The Zara I had known was always fashionably late, making grand entrances that commanded attention. This Zara looked like she had not slept in weeks. Her designer clothes still fit perfectly, but there was something hollow about her appearance. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. A tremor in her hands that she tried to disguise by clutching her purse. Miranda showed her into my office, and I watched as Zara took in the space. The expensive furniture. The view of the city. The wall of diplomas and awards that proclaimed my success to anyone who cared to look. Her eyes lingered on the framed quote behind my desk. I wondered if she would recognize her own words. Please have a seat, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She sat carefully, like she was afraid the furniture might reject her. You look. She started, then stopped. Different. 10 years will do that to a person. I opened a legal pad and clicked my pen. Now tell me about your situation. For the next hour, she laid out the wreckage of her perfect life. Kieran had been cheating. Not just recently, for years. Multiple affairs with women who worked for various Wells Media subsidiaries. He had been careful, but not careful enough. Last month, she had discovered an entire second phone with texts, photos, and financial records that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. I confronted him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He did not even try to deny it. He just looked at me like I was inconvenient. Inconvenient. I knew that feeling intimately. What did he say exactly? He said our marriage had been over for years, and I was delusional if I thought otherwise. He said I should be grateful for the lifestyle he had provided and not make things ugly. Make things ugly. The phrase settled in my chest like a warm coal. Tell me about the prenup. Her face crumpled. I barely read it. I was so happy to be marrying him, so eager to start our life together. My lawyer back then was someone Kieran recommended. I just signed where he told me to sign. Classic mistake. But one that might not be as fatal as she thought. Do you have a copy? She pulled a thick document from her purse with shaking hands. I found this in his office safe, along with some other papers. I spent the next 20 minutes reading through the agreement. It was brutal but not airtight. There were provisions that might be challengeable, especially if we could prove fraud or duress. What other papers? I asked. Financial documents. Bank statements for accounts I did not know existed. Investment portfolios. Property deeds. She pulled out a flash drive. I copied everything. Smart girl. Maybe there was some fight left in her after all. Zara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded. Why did you come to me? There are dozens of family law attorneys in this city with more experience in high-asset divorces. Why seek out someone from your past? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Because I remember how hard you used to fight for things that mattered to you, she said finally. And because I know what it feels like to be underestimated. Kieran and his lawyers think I am just some trophy wife who will roll over and accept whatever scraps they throw at me. She looked up, and for the first time since she had walked in, I saw a flash of the old Zara. The one who had been sharp enough to land a job at Sterling and Associates. The one who had been confident enough to believe she deserved a man like Kieran Wells. I need someone who knows how to prove people wrong. Prove people wrong. The words hit differently coming from her mouth. My retainer is $50,000, I said. Non-refundable. If this case goes to trial, you could be looking at total legal fees in excess of $200,000. She did not even blink. Whatever it takes. I slid a retainer agreement across the desk. Welcome to Carrington Legal Solutions, Zara. Let me show you what average can do. The first thing I did was hire Marcus Chin, the best private investigator I knew. If Kieran had been sloppy enough to leave evidence of his affairs lying around, there was probably more where that came from. The second thing I did was bring in Diana Petrov, a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets. Rich men like Kieran always thought they were smarter than their wives. They rarely considered that their wives might hire people who were smarter than them. Within 2 weeks, we had built a file that would make Kieran's head spin. The affairs were worse than Zara had initially discovered. We found evidence of at least 7 different women over the course of their 8-year marriage. Hotels, gifts, trips that Zara had been told were business expenses. One of the women had been set up in a condo that Kieran was paying for through a shell company. But the real treasure was in the financial records. Diana had uncovered a web of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency investments, and real estate holdings that Kieran had carefully kept hidden from his wife. The prenup might have protected his premarital assets, but everything acquired during the marriage was supposed to be community property. He had been systematically moving money out of their joint accounts and into vehicles that only he controlled. Classic financial abuse, designed to leave Zara with nothing if their marriage ever ended. How much are we talking about? I asked Diana during our strategy meeting. She consulted her notes. Conservatively, $12 million in hidden assets. Possibly more. I felt that familiar thrill that came with a case that was about to turn in our favor. Zara, I said, turning to my client. We need to discuss strategy. She had been coming to my office twice a week for updates, and I had watched her transform over the course of our investigation. The hollow, desperate woman who had first walked through my door was being replaced by someone harder. Someone who was ready to fight. What are our options? We have 2 choices. We can present this evidence during settlement negotiations and try to reach an agreement without going to court. It would be faster, cheaper, and more private. Or, we can take this to trial and destroy him publicly. Every affair, every hidden account, every lie he told you. It all becomes part of the public record. The media would have a field day with the heir to Wells Media getting exposed as a cheating, manipulative fraud. Her eyes lit up with something that looked like hunger. What would you recommend? I pretended to consider the question, but I already knew what I was going to say. I had been planning this moment for 3 months. Normally, I would recommend settlement. It is usually in the client's best interest to avoid the emotional toll of a public trial. But you did not hire me to be normal, did you? She smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen from her since she had walked into my office. No. I hired you to go to war. Then let me show you what war looks like. Kieran's legal team was exactly what I had expected. 3 attorneys from Morrison, Pike & Associates, the kind of white shoe firm that charged $1,000 an hour to intimidate people like me. Their lead attorney was James Morrison III, a man who wore his Harvard pedigree like armor, and spoke in the kind of condescending tone that suggested he had never lost a case to anyone he considered beneath him. Our first meeting was held in the conference room at Morrison's firm. A deliberate intimidation tactic designed to remind me that I was playing in their house. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my most expensive suit, and carrying a briefcase that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Morrison was already seated at the head of the massive conference table, flanked by his associates. Kieran sat beside them, looking like a man who had never doubted that he would win. They had not bothered to stand when I entered the room. Mistake number 1. Miss Carrington, Morrison said, not bothering to rise. Thank you for coming. I assume you are here to discuss reasonable terms for ending this unfortunate situation. Actually, I said, setting my briefcase down with deliberate care, I am here to give you one opportunity to avoid complete and total humiliation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's smile was patronizing. I think you may be misunderstanding the dynamics of this situation. Mrs. Wells signed a very comprehensive prenuptial agreement. Our position is quite strong. Your position, I said, opening my briefcase and withdrawing a thick folder, is about to become very uncomfortable. I slid copies of our evidence across the table. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photos of Kieran with various women, financial records showing the systematic hiding of marital assets. The silence stretched for nearly a minute as they absorbed what they were looking at. Kieran's face had gone pale. Where did you get these? Discovery is a beautiful thing, I said. Especially when the other side has been stupid enough to leave a paper trail. Morrison was flipping through the documents, his confidence visibly evaporating. Some of these accounts. How did you find assets that your client thought he had successfully hidden? I am very good at my job, Mr. Morrison. That is why people pay me $800 an hour. $800 an hour. The same rate I had quoted Zara during our first phone call. The rate that had made her pause in disbelief. Now it sounded like a bargain. What do you want? Kieran asked, his voice tight. I smiled. Everything. What followed was 3 hours of the most satisfying legal work of my career. Morrison tried every trick in the book. He questioned the authenticity of our evidence. He threatened to challenge the legality of how we had obtained it. He suggested that a judge would never award significant assets to a woman who had contributed so little to the marriage. Contributed so little. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Actually, I said, let me tell you what Mrs. Wells contributed to this marriage. I opened another folder. 8 years of hosting business dinners that helped secure multimillion-dollar deals for Wells Media. Documentation shows her personal involvement in at least 15 major client relationships that generated over $50 million in revenue. I slid more papers across the table. 8 years of managing household staff, property maintenance, and social obligations that allowed Mr. Wells to focus entirely on his business interests. The estimated value of these services, if outsourced, would be approximately $200,000 annually. More papers. 8 years of serving as the public face of the Wells family at charity events, galas, and social functions that were essential to maintaining the family's reputation and business relationships. Conservative estimate of the marketing value. $500,000 annually. I sat back in my chair. So when you suggest that Mrs. Wells contributed little to this marriage, you are essentially arguing that $50 million in business revenue, plus 7 years of executive-level household management and marketing services, equals little. I look forward to making that argument in front of a jury. Morrison was no longer smiling. Furthermore, I continued, the prenuptial agreement specifically states that assets acquired during the marriage through joint efforts would be considered community property. Given Mrs. Wells' documented contributions to her husband's business success, we will be arguing that a significant portion of Wells Media's growth during their marriage was the direct result of joint efforts. Kieran leaned forward. That is insane. The company was mine before we got married. The company was yours, I agreed. But its growth was ours. Mrs. Wells can document her involvement in every major business development over the past 8 years. Every client dinner, every strategic introduction, every public appearance that enhanced your reputation. I pulled out one final document. This is a forensic analysis of Wells Media's revenue growth, broken down by client relationships that can be directly traced to Mrs. Wells' involvement. We are prepared to argue that her contributions were responsible for approximately 30% of the company's growth during their marriage. The room was dead silent. 30% of $60 million, I said, is $18 million. Add that to the $12 million in hidden marital assets, and we are looking at a settlement demand of $30 million. Kieran looked like he was going to be sick. You cannot be serious, Morrison said. Oh, I am absolutely serious. But here is the thing. I am feeling generous today. My client has authorized me to accept a settlement of $25 million, paid within 60 days. In exchange, we agree to seal all records related to this case. And if we refuse? I smiled. Then we go to trial. Every sordid detail becomes public record. The affairs, the financial manipulation, the systematic deception. I will make sure every business journalist in the city has copies of everything we have found. I stood up and began packing my briefcase. Wells Media stock is currently trading at $42 a share. I wonder what it will be trading at after the market learns that the company's heir apparent has been running a shadow life that would make a soap opera blush. Wait, Kieran said. But I was already walking toward the door. You have 48 hours to respond to our settlement offer. After that, we file for trial and release a press statement outlining the nature of our claims. I paused at the door and looked back. Oh, and Mr. Morrison? Next time you want to intimidate opposing counsel, you might want to make sure they actually care about your opinion. They called 18 hours later. $25 million is acceptable, Morrison said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. Excellent. I will have the settlement documents prepared by end of business today. There is one condition. I am listening. Mr. Wells would like to include a confidentiality clause that prevents Mrs. Wells from ever discussing the details of their marriage or divorce. I pretended to consider this. That will cost extra. What? My client's silence is valuable. If Mr. Wells wants to ensure that his business associates never learn about his extracurricular activities, he will need to pay for that privilege. How much? An additional $2 million. Silence. Fine. Wonderful. I will add that to the settlement agreement. 3 weeks later, Zara walked into my office for the last time as my client. She looked different again. The hollow desperation was gone, replaced by something I had never seen in her before. Confidence that did not depend on anyone else's approval. The wire transfers went through this morning, I said, sliding the final documents across my desk. $27 million. Minus taxes and legal fees. You are officially a very wealthy divorced woman. She signed the papers with steady hands. I cannot believe it is over. How do you feel? She was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the city below. Free, she said finally. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. She stood to leave, then paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. That quote behind your desk. The one about being too average for law school. Did someone really say that to you? I met her eyes. Yes. It must have hurt. It did. But you used it. You turned it into fuel. I did. She nodded slowly. I think I understand now. Understand what? Why you became so good at this. Why you fight so hard for your clients. She paused. You know what it feels like to be dismissed. To have someone look at you and decide you are not worth their respect. There it was. The recognition I had been waiting 10 years to see in her eyes. Some people are motivated by praise, I said. Others are motivated by doubt. I have always preferred doubt. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. For what it is worth, she said quietly, I was wrong. About law school. About you. About everything. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the framed quote on my wall. You are just average. Law school eats girls like you alive. Zara Blackwood. I had kept those words as a reminder. A daily dose of motivation to prove the doubters wrong. But now, for the first time in 10 years, I did not need them anymore. I took the frame down and placed it in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I would take it out again. Maybe someday I would need that particular kind of fuel. But not today. Today, I had something better than an old insult to motivate me. I had the knowledge that the girl they called too average had just billed her biggest doubter $27 million worth of legal fees. And I had earned every single cent. My assistant knocked on my door during a particularly complex custody negotiation. Sorry to interrupt, Miranda said. But there is someone here to see you. She does not have an appointment. Who is it? Zara Blackwood. She says it is personal. I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation. In my experience, when former clients returned without an appointment, it usually meant new legal troubles. Send her in. But the woman who walked through my door was not the broken, desperate client I had represented 6 months earlier. This was someone I had never met before. Zara was wearing a simple but elegant business suit. Her hair was shorter, more professional. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were worth. "I hope you do not mind me dropping by," she said. "I have something for you." She placed a small wrapped package on my desk. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a silver pen, engraved with a simple message. "To the lawyer who taught me what fighting looks like. Thank you for showing me what I was capable of." "Zara, this is beautiful, but I started my own consulting firm," she said. "Business development for media companies. Turns out, 8 years of watching Kieran work taught me more than I realized." She smiled. "I landed my first major client last week, a boutique firm that wants to expand into digital media. The contract is worth $2 million. $2 million. I remembered when that number would have seemed impossible to her. "That is incredible. Congratulations." "I wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for the divorce case, for showing me that I did not have to accept other people's limitations." She stood to leave, then paused. "There is one more thing. I know this might sound strange, but I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For that night. 10 years ago. When I told you that you were too average for law school." The words hung between us like a bridge across a decade of silence. "I was scared," she continued. "Scared that if you succeeded, it would mean I had been playing it safe. That maybe I was the one who was too average to take real risks." I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman who had once made me feel so small. "I spent years telling myself I was protecting you from disappointment," she said. "But really, I was protecting myself from the possibility that you might be braver than I was." Braver than I was. The word settled in my chest like a key finding its lock. "You were right to ignore me," she said. "And I am glad you did." After she left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about the strange paths that bring people back into our lives. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the old framed quote. Looking at it now, I realized something I had never seen before. Those words had not just motivated me to prove Zara wrong. They had motivated me to prove myself right. The difference was everything. I placed the frame back in the drawer and closed it. Some ghosts, I realized, were meant to be laid to rest. My law practice has grown beyond anything I could have imagined during those wine-soaked nights in my tiny apartment. I have 17 attorneys working under me now, specializing in everything from high-asset divorce to corporate litigation. The office has expanded to take up an entire floor of the building. The view is even better from up here. But my favorite part is still the wall behind my desk. Instead of that old quote, I now display something else. A collage of thank you notes from clients whose lives I have helped rebuild. Women who found their voices after years of being silenced. Men who discovered their worth after being discarded. People who learned that being underestimated could be the greatest gift of all. Last week, a young woman came in for a consultation. She was 25, working at a coffee shop, studying for the LSAT on her breaks. Her boyfriend had just told her she was dreaming too big and should be more realistic about her future. She reminded me of someone. "What made you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?" I asked her. "Someone told me I could not do it," she said simply. And I realized that was probably the best reason to try. I smiled and opened a legal pad. "Tell me about your case," I said. Because sometimes the best way to heal an old wound is to help someone else avoid the same injury. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is prove that the girl they called too average can become the woman they desperately need. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of revenge, redemption, and triumph. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode of real people overcoming impossible odds and proving their doubters wrong. Your support means everything to us. Subscribe now.